Back live with us tonight here on In Focus Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405. A new act signed into law will enforce the compulsory DNA sampling of suspects arrested and charged with Schedule 8 offences, including rape and murder. The law will take effect from the 31st of January. Some civil society organizations and gender activists have hailed the law as a step in the right direction in bringing justice for victims of rape. Joining us now to chat about this is Wise4Afrika Director Advocate Brenda Madumise-Pajibo. Advocate, good evening and thank you very much for your time. What does the proclamation of Section 36 of the Forensic Procedure Act actually bring in our fight against gender-based violence?
Oh, good evening and good evening to the viewers. I mean, this has been a long-awaited relief for many victims of gender-based violence and just murder cases in general. And so what this bill proposes is that every perpetrator of murder or rape will be subjected to a test and a DNA test to establish their complicity or their involvement in a murder case or a rape case. And that is mandatory. That is supposed to be done by the South African Police Service. What needs to happen, and is the point that we wish to advance and make sure that it's understood, is that we have a crisis in this country of the lab, the forensic lab, having a backlog and has been dysfunctional for the longest of time. So you can have this piece of legislation and that is welcomed. But if we have a forensic lab that has not been able to process DNA samples for the last how many years that we can talk about, and we have victims of rape and murder who still are waiting for those DNA tests to be tested so that then their cases can proceed in court, and they're still waiting today, then there's no justice. And we can be excited about a piece of legislation that is going to be implemented from the 31st of January, but if you don't have a functional working lab, it's as if you don't have anything in place. And for us is that once this act comes into operation on the 31st of January, you need to ensure that the lab, we don't have issues of procurement, that the backlog has been dealt with, and once the DNA samples are brought to the lab, they can be processed and results can be given immediately so that the cases can proceed. Remember also that in the Eastern Cape, they don't have a lab at all. Every DNA sample in the Eastern Cape, once someone is raped or murdered, they need to take those samples and take them to the Western Cape in Cape Town. Now, can you imagine what happens to that, to the veracity and that sample once it's been transported the way it's been transported? South African Police Service had undertaken to build a lab in the Eastern Cape so that then they don't have to be driving to the Western Cape for those DNA samples to be tested. So yes, it's a step in the right direction, but that must be in tandem with a working forensic lab that will process these DNA samples swiftly and promptly.
If, as you put it, DNA remains the most important and most effective crime-fighting tool in this particular case, in your view, why do you think this has not been prioritized? Why don't we have more forensic labs in the country that are functioning?
Listen, I think we need to call it for what it is. We have got most incompetent, we've got inept people who are in these positions who have not had the political will to do anything about these matters. Why would we be discussing a backlog of DNA testing samples in the lab and no one saw the need to understand why that was important for DNA samples to be tested, right? So if we had competent leaders, if we had competent managers, if we had competent forensic experts, they would understand the importance of processing a DNA sample for a rape victim who wants to have justice attended to and receive that justice yesterday, not 20 years from now or 5 years from now or a year later. We've got victims of violence who are still waiting for their rape kits to be analyzed and for those matters to come before the court. So it's just sheer ineptness, sheer incompetence, and don't care attitude from those who are charged with the responsibility of providing these services, that they didn't think it's important and that it's urgent on their part to ensure that the lab is functioning and fully functioning. That lab has got board of directors, is run by a board of directors. Surely all of them in that board understand the magnitude of the problem, and they ensure that the systems are functioning and are functioning optimally, so that they can give justice to the many victims of this violence, the murderers that are walking free, the rapists that are walking free, because you are failing as a facility that is given the responsibility to analyze this DNA for doing the job that they're supposed to do, and not doing it, and no one holding them accountable to do so.
I suppose, I mean, that then goes on to say, we cannot prematurely say, oh, well, this now will deal with, for example, the question of identifying repeat offenders, as a story we are leading with right now, where a previous rapist was given parole, and now it seems he's offended again. Of course, those are some of the facts that will still continue to come out. I mean, it's this early days then to say, oh, well, this will now deal with this question of repeat offenders.
So, you know, once we were advised that the Minister of Justice is considering releasing many, perpetrators of different crimes on parole, we wrote as an organization to the minister and said to him, please halt this process and let's have a set criteria on how these individuals are going to be released, right? And it has to be systematic on how you go about it. It's just not willy-nilly. It's not just because this person has been in jail or in our correctional facilities for the last 5 years and nothing has happened, so we release them. You have to be systematic and have a criteria of why this individual is being released. Now, if we had a fully functioning DNA system and these labs were functioning as they are supposed to function, most of these individuals who were released would not have been released, because their DNA would have been matched, and you have realized that they are responsible not just for one rape, maybe multiple rapes or even multiple murders, and they don't deserve to be on parole. We have made a case on a parole system that has to take into account gender-based violence and ensure that you don't just release an individual because you think that they've been there for a long time, and so they must just be released. What interventions have been brought in the correctional services to ensure that this individual might not be a repeat offender, for instance, right? So, one, this piece of legislation is a step in the right direction, for the simple reason that it's going to assist us to start isolating many individuals who have been perpetrators of these heinous crimes of rape, and you will be able to isolate and see that this individual has been committing rape for many times, and in what kind of an environment, or even the murder itself. So our contention and our position is that yes, we can have this piece of legislation, and I think in South Africa we get excited about a piece of legislation. Yes, it creates a foundation for us to move from, but that must be followed up with resources, must be followed up with the facilities for this work to take place. So we know as of today that you have not had a functioning lab. That must be emphasized. You have not had it. So what is going to make it a difference? On the 31st of January, when this law kicks in, are we certain that all the DNA samples that are already in the system will be processed without any further delays?
What is exactly going to make it different? In other words, where do we need to put pressure right now? Yes, the proclamation has been made. Where must the pressure go now?
The pressure should be on the DNA facilities themselves. We need to be asking the question, have they been able to clear the backlog that they told us that they're still dealing with? Do they have the requisite number of personnel to deal with the backlog? Do they have all the tools that they need? All the procurement issues that the minister told us was the reason for the delay in processing some of the DNA samples. Have all those issues been attended to and dealt with? And now, on the 31st of January, come the 1st of February, any sample that is brought to the attention of that lab will be processed now that this law is in effect. So we need to be putting pressure on the minister to tell us that the resources are in place and that there will not be any delays. Once a rape victim, once I go and I report a rape and my sample is taken and that of the perpetrator is taken, that they will be processed without any delay.
Advocate, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. You're in Focus. That's the director for Wise4Afrika, Advocate Brenda Madumise.